Welcome to the UNCCD's series on good land stewardship for present and future generations. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me here, and it's a pleasure. And then I'm Ermias Beta Mariam from the World Agroforestry, which is based in Nairobi at headquarters. And then I'm a land health scientist. And then what we do is that we call it land health because we feel that land has a health like human beings or any living organisms. And then oftentimes we take it, land for granted as an object, but it is a living system by which, we get our basic ecosystem services, the food we eat, the fiber, and then all the basic ecosystem services that humankind gets is from land. So we really care about land. And then what we do is that we really try to evaluate, understand what happens with the land. Like when you do your diagnosis in the hospital, you go to a doctor, you check yourself, and then their diagnosis will tell you, you have this and then this problem, that is a solution. So oftentimes in land, what we do is that we also evaluate land and then understand if there is any constraint or potential within it. And then we will try to come up with, a solution. And then oftentimes our solutions, because we are agroforestry center, nature-based solutions to heal it, to make it more productive and sustainable for the future. That's in short, what we do when we have the land health at the World Agroforestry Center.
It's actually the first time I've ever had anyone called a land health scientist. So thank you for explaining it to me. And now, do you do this for individual farmers or do you do this with governments or, so I just want to understand it a little bit in relation to, for instance, what used to be called agricultural extension officers. How are those related?
Well, because we are from, one of the global, centers for research, and then our mandate is mainly really to do what the national government does not be able to do in terms of science and the science-based solutions. However, we are working all the way from the farmers, which we think that these are lifetime researchers for us because we think that we are technically good, but these are the people who really have a lot of experience and local knowledge by which we really also learn from them. We work with them. And then that is where we collect all our data. That's where we would like to really influence. Particularly, our target audience in our research is small holding farmers in the tropics. It could be in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So smallholders are our basic major clients. You can call them sometimes private sector because they have their own land. They make decisions on their own land, and then they produce and feed the world, more or less. So those are our clients. And then, of course, at a national level, we work also with the national research institutes because we would like to, co-evolve, co-develop all the science and then all the practices which we think really works best. And then that's also one way of making our work more sustainable, because if you don't embed it into the national system, and then it will not be, the uptake will be often low, because we have been always asked that what is the rate of adoption of your science? Sometimes it will be low. So one of the mechanisms by which we would like to transfer that is just by working the local, actors in terms of research and development. Also, development organizations are also very interesting, partners.
Right.
And then we don't do research as we do for the sake of development, but we would like to embed research in actual development process, because development is a continuous process, while science products comes once in a while. So we would like to really make that kind of continuity by blending research, together with the development. That's what we really do at the World Agroforestry.
Absolutely. And I think this is the key in terms of really linking what conventions like the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, which I work for, actually is trying to do for local communities. And one of the things that I would like to come back to is this use of science, embedding science in the work of the communities. So as you know, the convention has, with the assistance of governments and researchers, identified nearly over 200 good practices for managing the land that achieves three things. One, it helps the land to become resilient. Two, it increases the productivity of the land. And three, it enables, it reduces costs, it saves costs. But we haven't seen that taken up a lot. And I know that you're working on some of these techniques like agroforestry. What is the gap? What are we really missing? Where are we going wrong? Because the research is there, the knowledge is there of where you can apply these techniques, but we're not seeing that diffusion. Is it that we're missing something ourselves? Is it happening on the ground and we're not seeing it? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and then also, some evidences, put it, do research in terms of adoption and practices. And then because we have heard a lot about, environmental catastrophes and then here and there, and then what is the action taken? I think it is really a combination of several things. And then one thing is, for instance, if you look at it, farmers and then also all practitioners need a little bit of incentives, for instance. Do you have enough incentives? When I say incentive, it's not always in cash, but is there any road infrastructure, for instance, that connect them with the urban-rural system? And then if they produce more, is there any road that could take their produce? And then also they need inputs also at the same time. Is there any good road or infrastructure, just as an example, by which they can have access to this kind of inputs and then outputs? So that is, for instance, in terms of government capital investment, I think that is very key. Otherwise, these rural smallholders are a little bit disconnected from the main discourse of development. And then that is really one thing. And then the second thing is also, I think it's also, they have a social dimension, because sometimes if you take it for the example of Ethiopia, for instance, where I came from, and oftentimes, researchers says that land tenure is very critical, because if the land is not your own, would you really be able to manage it the way you want it? And then that's how even sometimes some of these things are really happening. If you compare, like in terms of the number of trees in your land, because what we would like to see is that, like Kenya has a very beautiful policy as a policy level. They say that, almost 10% of all agricultural lands need to have a 10% recover. All agricultural lands need to have a 10% recover, which is a very beautiful policy. But how to do it? There are some counties which really do even more than that. Last time I was in a county called Muranga. It is beautiful. The farmers have seen it. They plant trees. When you say trees, it's not just trees for the sake of trees, because there are multiple trees, like fruit trees. You can say so many mango trees, so many, because the climate, the environment is so suitable. And then it's not about addressing environmental issues, but it's also their economic interest, financial interest. So they can really achieve a number of goals by having this kind of nature-based solutions. But you are right, the uptake sometimes is really low, because, there is lack of investment, lack of extension, knowledge, infrastructure. And then I think it is a whole enabling environments. I think in one of our group with the science policy interface really came up with, these are the basic gaps. So they have some gaps, and then there should be, something to be done. Particularly, I think government is not to take a lot of investment and attention, because oftentimes we, in developing countries, we take it for, development aid, and then this kind of supports to come, projects coming, funded by international funding community. However, I think this is where, the basic right of the people, the basic right of the land, and that the government need to be, to me, more, every government need to be a little bit accountable, more strong and consistent on these topics, because sometimes we shift attention, sometimes climate change. So the whole thing goes to climate change. Next time, biodiversity, the whole attention goes to biodiversity. This is what happens globally. However, in this landscape, the whole problem is, the land health issue, agricultural production issue, and then the livelihood issues. So I think to me, there will be a lot of, attention should be given by the governments and then the people living, the real actors and the stakeholders on the ground.
So for me, as a person who's working in journalism, one of the things that I've encountered recently are young people in Africa, very interested in going back to agriculture, highly educated, that are beginning to consider going back to agriculture. But what I'm hearing constantly is, where do we begin? And so you've worked with communities, you've worked with farmers. If somebody had land and they even had the tenure, how do they begin to tap into, where do they go? Where are the mechanisms? Where do they really go to get help?
Yeah, I mean, to me,
what are the systems?
Yeah, I think, every generation have their own interest, because, you have the industrial era, you have, the agriculture, and then, the service era now, if you call it, in the developed countries. But, more or less almost 80% of the, 70% of, the people in developing countries, particularly in Africa, depend on agriculture. That is a major sector of, creates job. That is a major sector, everything happens. But the level of investment there is not really as such very attractive. And if you look at even the land holding size, the land holding size is becoming shrinking all the time because population is increasing. The same land is being used by several people. So to improve the whole productivity and making agriculture profitable is a missing link to me. So how do we make agriculture profitable? Because if it is profitable, I think it is human tendency not really to run away from it. They will go in and do it. But is agriculture attractive and then profitable? Oftentimes not, because that's why we call it subsistence agriculture. So how do we transform agriculture? Transform it, really. It's not about small change. To be really more attractive and profitable. I think that is how, I think most of the young people may not find it very profitable because they may prefer to have, a small job in towns and urbans. That's why you see a lot of migration from rural urban migration and then sometimes from urbans to even, outside their country. So I think that is a very interesting area by which we could really absorb a number of youth in Africa if you make it agriculture more profitable. And then there are some cases, but it is not really, as big as the scale of the problem that you have seen it. And that's why I say that we need to have a kind of a transformative approach by which how do we make agriculture more profitable and attractive for them. One example I can give you is that, in our world agroforestry, and then we will try to make it agriculture digital, for instance. When you say the word digital, the user will be attracted a little bit. So in that case, for instance, in terms of soil analytics, in the past, you have to go and you have to do it in a formal laboratory way. But now there are a lot of things, the coming of remote sensing tools, more sensors, and then all these kind of things. From the technology side, is making more attractive. But I think it's also we need to revise our curriculum in the universities because most students do not prefer to the agriculture faculties. They would like to prefer to the service. They would like to the IT department because they are attracted and then they have seen. So I think we need to also work on the whole education system and then we need to really make agriculture again a more attractive kind of discipline, I would say. Yeah.
So you mentioned an example there that I'm interested in, and that's the one of using the digital technology to assess your land health. Is that how it works? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it can.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it is nowadays it is possible. There are so many sensors because even we are taking to use even a mobile phone to really take a picture of your soil, and then at some stage you should be able to with some certainty. This is if you go to a given farmer, even there is a huge local farmer, and the farmer will tell you, this is a little bit dark soil. That means it has more organic carbon. It has more resilience because it holds more water. It holds more nutrients, and then it produces more. So that is a kind of knowledge. But if you can make it more digital, taking that basic principle and then more applicable, that is really possible. So, and then that could also a little bit attract, agriculture for the young people. But for me, I think it's a little bit of, making it more profitable, more attractive, and then starting all the way from the education to the whole, investment in every country. So I would say there are, I think for me, it's a lost opportunity. It's a big sector. It is a very productive sector if you make it really working, but it is a little bit complex. But the whole idea of science is about, and then also development is really, we need to find an entry point by which agriculture is really good for all of us.
Okay, now let's come to something else that you have dealt with in the past that I think would be of interest to our listeners. And that is the issue of water. Drought in Africa, water in Africa. So sometimes, as we saw last year, and in that last, let me take the last 5 years as a snapshot. There was a huge drought in Southern Africa, actually Eastern and Southern Africa, over a 2-year period, I think 2015, 2016, and even going into 2017. Subsequently, I think last year sometime, there was a huge flood in the Southern African region of Mozambique and these countries. So, and we've also had in recent years, and you told me you're from Kenya, and there's a lot of rain. I mean, it's rained through into February, which is an anomaly in the history of our country. I was meeting 96-year-old people saying, they've never seen this amount of rain and in this period of time. So it seems to me that there's sometimes we don't have enough water. Sometimes we have a lot of water. What's going on? What really is going on in Africa? Do we not have enough fresh water, or are we not managing it well?
Yeah, I think there are interesting studies on the potential of irrigation and water use in Africa and then transforming agriculture in general. I think there is huge potential, and then I would say we use less than 10%, to be honest. And then not to be very specific, almost less less than 10% of the potential of irrigation or water in general is being used wisely in the continent. And then that is a big missed opportunity to me. And then there are several reasons researchers pointed out, like, for instance, lack of, serious investment by the government and a lack of, clear infrastructure for, market import output. And we need to really understand the whole value chain. Sometimes farmers use water, invest on irrigation, they produce more, but they don't get market. So it's not always the biophysical content, but the whole socioeconomic and policy and then all these things need to really work together. And then I think that's why agriculture and environment needs a very holistic kind of, approach by which you need to bring. You cannot bring one and then leave the other. So if you are using water, if you don't have the basic infrastructure, well, to sell your produce, and the farmers are wise, they know. If you ask them, yes, if they have water, they can produce more than once and twice or produce more per unit area. However, if they produce sometimes more, where do they sell? Is there any incentive or this kind of mechanisms? I think they are really in trouble and this, to solving this kind of problems. Otherwise, in terms of water potential to transform agriculture is really huge. If you look at like Nigeria, for instance, even Mali, and then even Ethiopia, I think there is a lot of water. You mentioned Kenya, where you have a lot of rain, but do you really manage this water? So, and then when you say also water is not always about, putting a dam and then making irrigation like we see like in Egypt or Sudan or elsewhere. It's all about managing moisture in general. So how do you really take all this water to go into the soil and then keep it for there? And then is it a runoff that takes even your nutrients? Yeah. It's not a blessing. It could be a curse, but it could be reversed. But how do you really manage to really keep all this water to go deep into the water system in terms of the groundwater recharge? It could be within the farm. And then how do you really make the soil also healthy so that it could keep it for a longer time? So one of the discussion points we have here during the science policy interface meeting is that to mitigate drought and then build the resilience of agriculture is really building the soil organic matter so that the water will be there and then it will be available and the nutrients will be also available for the plant to survive when you have like short rain, variable rain, and then drought. So I think not looking at for the downside, because oftentimes people, when they think irrigation is about infrastructure, but it's all about, how to manage our moisture. And then I would say to me, our soils are the banks for the water. So save it in the bank. And then I think when you have a saving in your bank, sometimes you can really help you to resist the shock. Otherwise, if you take the drought map of the world, and then United States was been stricken by shock all the time, but they are resilient because they have the capacity to come back into the system and continue business, right? So in Africa, because of, they are very, subsistence farming, and then a small shock will lose the whole assets. Look at the pastoralists. For instance, in terms of agriculture, we always talk about crops, but the majority of Africans are livestock producers. Livestock is an important sector. So anytime there is a drought, and then how many of the Maasais lose their cattle suddenly. So that's how, it is really more vulnerable people. And then that's why this convention, particularly the land grant neutrality and the UNCCD, is really trying to address this kind of, communities in the landscape which are more vulnerable for drought. They are resilient, but if there is anything happens, then it will be they cannot stand the shock. Otherwise, in terms of water potential, there are really huge potential. And then also one gap I would say is also knowledge. How do you manage irrigation water? Because sometimes there are some communities or small scale irrigations they have there, but if you don't manage it very well, and then even it can affect your land because there are so many salinity issues in Asia. And then also I can tell you even in the northern part of Ethiopia, we have so many small initiation of small scale dams. But if you don't manage water properly, it would also affect your soil. And then it could even affect your rain-fed based agriculture. So it needs a whole knowledge, a whole investment. And then also I think it should be, otherwise it is a very, very interesting, opportunity. And then for Africa particularly, I would say, if you don't invest and then if you don't really make use of our water resources, I don't think the agricultural sector move up. And then when I say transformative projects, I think that's where I think is we need to have a very interesting investment on our soil and land health, and then at the same time make use of the water. So in the whole production cycle, it's about the gene, and then there's an environment, and then there is a management part of it. So for the environment, I think the wells that we have is that we have good soils, but we need to protect them. We need to make them more healthy. And then also the water resource has to be there. And then I think that could really help to transform the agriculture, I would say.
I like your idea of calling the land your bank, because I think you're banking not just water, you're banking nutrients in the soil. It really is your bank, but we don't take it that seriously. But does it matter that I, as a single farmer, only, when you think about banks, there are people who invest well, there are people who don't invest very well. Yeah. So if you're in a community where you're the only one banking in your soil, does it help anyway?
Well, I mean, to me, yes, because, if you, it's all this kind of starts from your farm. And then if you just start from the big to the small, I think it would be really interesting if everyone is responsible for his own land as much as possible and then recognized. So that is it, because if you have sometimes if you compare the amount of yield or soil health that you find the farmers or shambas in Kenya, we call it close to a farm, to household, and then it's a little bit far, they are not treated very well. So if you put your organic input into it, if you manage it very well, if you really stop erosion from your field, that is your account. So to say, you have your land title is, you can call it is your bank account number, so to say. So unless everyone is doing that way, one way or the other, I think it would be very difficult, because if you think sometimes collectively, and then there is what you call, in Ethiopia, I tell you, we call it the tragedy of the commons, because if land belongs to the community, and then sometimes not every member of the community might not take care of that land properly. So it could be a little bit of misuse of this kind of natural resources. I think the whole thing that we need to invest a lot is really changing attitude. It's not about my land, but it will be our land. But how? When my land is good and your land is good, our land is really good. So otherwise, we shouldn't say that this is a responsibility of the government, this is the responsibility of Mr. A, or this is the responsibility of that farmer. It might work. And then I think in the whole communication, what we would like to see happening is that really changing attitude. That's what you call impact. Then if that attitude and thinking is changing, and then I think that will really can transform the whole agriculture environment issues that we are talking about.
Thank you so much, Dr. Batimariam. We really appreciate your being with us today. And yes, have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for